to another episode of Banking Matters. I'm your host, Linsey Hugueley, and joining me today is Ms. Gayle Brooke. Gayle brings more than 4 decades of dedication, discipline, and deep expertise into banking and compliance. Her career began on the teller line in 1979, where curiosity became her superpower. She read every banking publication she could find, attended every educational opportunity available, and quickly rose through the ranks, first as head teller, then assistant branch manager, and ultimately branch manager. She grew up in a banking culture grounded in a strong compliance values, not just memorizing the processes, but understanding the regulatory framework that shaped them. That foundation set the tone for a lifelong commitment to learning. Her academic journey reflects that same drive. She graduated from the Northern Michigan School of Banking in 1995, followed by the Perry School of Banking in 1998, where she earned the Operations Award. She then won a scholarship to the prestigious Graduate School of Banking, graduating in 2001. In December of 2012, she stepped fully into the world of compliance. By February 2019, she passed the CRCM exam on her first attempt, earning such a moment of victory that she high-fived the proctor through the glass booth. In July of this year, Ms. Gayle was also awarded the Bank Compliance Leader Award. Congratulations, Ms. Gayle, and welcome to Banking Matters.
Thank you, Linsey.
So I am super excited about our conversation today and our topic on AI. But first, we do just like to take just a second. I know we went through your career journey, but how did you first get that job in 97 or in 79 to be a teller?
Oh my, that's a story all in itself. But with me, everything's always a story. When I was a senior in high school, I worked in what we called the guidance department. At that time, I was a student secretary, and my direct supervisor was Joyce Black. And what we did in that area was to assist my fellow seniors in picking course material, maybe those of us that were not intending to go to college, trade schools that would then dovetail with maybe they were taking auto shop at that time that was offered, maybe they were taking building trades. So to send them on to education that would suit their particular profile. We also tried to work with some of my fellow countrymen who weren't as studious as I was and help them to then catch up so that they'd have enough credits so that they could graduate. So there's always that.
That's awesome. Well, Ms. Gayle, I'd love to just dive in. Where would you like to start with AI in general and artificial intelligence in the financial industry?
It is such an enormous topic. I know I'm only going to touch the tip of the iceberg here, but I just kind of like to talk about the way we've approached this in our institution and then some of the common pillars that I think each institution needs to look at, whether they're that small town community bank taking their first steps, or if you're the brave people like BNY Mellon that now have 100 digital employees on payroll. Not sure how HR looks at that, but that's kind of an inside joke.
Things we may never know.
There we go. You don't have to pay them sick time. That's probably handy. But one of the things that I think is really important as you develop your AI process is to take a step back and decide, what is your strategy going to be? What are you going to focus on? And because you can't have all hands on all processes at one time, you really have to start and say, where do we think AI can help us the most? And where do we think we can put the best framework around that to make sure that we're getting the results that we're looking for? So once you have a strategy and a focus, then my next advice would be to develop a strong guidance or a steering committee to represent each of the business lines, and don't forget to invite compliance to the table. The governance committee should then spearhead the efforts to create an acceptable use policy, which we have done. And then ideally that would be approved by your board. And we've also gone through that process. And in my never humble opinion, that acceptable use policy should be presented to and formally acknowledged by every employee, preferably annually, and of course at the time of onboarding so that they know what acceptable uses are and how that process works in your particular institution.
I love that.
Once
And
those building blocks, I'm sorry, Linsey.
sorry, I was going to say, so roughly, what did the buy-in process look like around setting up the framework and the task force and the acceptable use policy?
Well, and it was, again, it was kind of every department was involved fairly early. I guess because I kept asking tough questions, they knew they wanted me to be involved in this process because, again, to the lifelong learning, I've been reading articles about AI for a very long time because you can't be a good consultant, you can't be a good compliance partner if you don't even have the basic concepts. So, I read and I read and then I read some more. But then these individuals from the different units, then we do have ongoing, typically monthly meetings, except maybe during the holidays that sometimes gets a little dicey. But we started doing risk assessments. And so we meet and we look through the risk assessments, and the risk assessments are based on how is AI being used in this particular process. We've also baked it into our vendor due diligence process so that when we bring a new vendor on board, or even if we're just contemplating bringing that vendor on board, do you use AI and how do you use AI? And so we're making sure that we know what kind of processes that we need to ask about if they're not using AI. And again, you've got to have periodic reviews because that answer could be no today, it may be yes tomorrow. So it's making sure to always keep your eye on that ball because it's forever, ever moving. And so the bank has also chosen to hold biweekly Zoom meetings, and we call them just an AI workshop. I'm surprised marketing didn't come up with a buzzy name for it, but it's just called an AI workshop, and it demonstrates the appropriate uses of our internal tools, and there are a few. And one of the recent sessions even gave you some tips on how to write a better prompt, and they did a demonstration which was comical where a person used sentence fragments as though they were in a verbal conversation with someone on the phone. And they said, do you see how when I only ask sentence fragments, I don't get the answer I'm looking for? It's the same way when you're talking to an AI agent. You need to use full sentences. You need to talk to them like you would talk to a person, which is a little frightening, especially if you're polite and then they're polite back to you. It gets a little weird. The next thing I would say is that you really need a strong, dedicated technical team to make sure that those guardrails that I talked about are in the right place and are being monitored. And so I will leave any discussion of the technical pieces to my IT cohorts. That's obviously not the sidewalk where the sun shines on compliance. And I'd say often is the case with AI, data privacy and cybersecurity, they're tightly woven into the fabric, and we need to consider them every step of this journey. It's been really encouraging for me, again, because I've been on the planet for a little while, to hear others in the industry besides myself compare the use of AI to the introduction of the calculator in school and the workplace back in the 70s. The basic premise was if you don't understand the underlying concepts, you won't realize the answer's been hallucinated, or, as in the case of a calculator, you simply hit the wrong switch. Which brings me full circle to probably my strongest message about AI is the human in the loop. All AI generated output must be carefully reviewed before trusted and put into place. And one of the many publications that I read introduced me to a new term, which I really love, and the word is work slop. And my observation is no one has the time in their day to be a victim of work slop, which is unverified AI that you provide to another employee, and then they've got a vast amount of cleanup to do before the document or whatever other output it might be is put into question because it's obviously they didn't review their homework before they turned it in. So that's mostly what I had to say about AI, which is probably a lot.
Yes, and so I will say I've had another guest on that had talked with us about how they want encourage and use AI very heavily in their marketing. And one of the
Hmm.
things he did reference was definitely going back behind and scrubbing it, just as if you would an intern. Basically, he said that's kind of the mindset that I have when I am utilizing it. And so, are you seeing within your institution a certain business line where you guys are utilizing AI more than others?
Well, you use marketing, and I would say they are probably one of the early adopters. And I wouldn't say there's less risk because there's never less risk when something's not being looked at after the fact. But they do use it to brainstorm. And some of our marketing people are full time on site. Some of them are not. And it's not quite like it was in the days where everyone sat around a huge conference table and brainstormed. And obviously, you could do that through a Zoom call or whatever platform you use, Microsoft Teams. But some of this is just asking Swifty, which is what we call our main AI agent. We have sub agents, and that's probably another whole topic. You'll have to ask another guest to talk about agents. But yeah, the marketing team uses it in some circumstances to brainstorm. And the people that put on, we have IT tech talks and we have AI workshops, and they alternate weeks. And so, of course, they're using it to create graphics to bring up for the beginning of the workshop to get people engaged, to get them interested. Compliance people tend not to do that. We just kind of cut right to the chase and start talking about the topic material. But yeah,
Absolutely.
there are several other use cases, and I would say we're integrating them slowly again so that we can follow our own governance and say, is there a human in this loop? Yes. Did this process produce the expected output? Yes or no or sort of. Sort of is also a form of no when you're compliance. So we're moving along at a reasonable pace, but again, what's a reasonable pace?
Yeah, I feel like
We
it's
just
the
want to
reasonable
make
pace
yeah,
to be whatever you guys are comfortable with. And
exactly,
one last
and that has
question.
to do with the size of the institution and your risk tolerance and how it's being incorporated into the daily work life.
Absolutely. And so I do have one more question. Have you guys gone through an exam since you have adapted this use policy?
We have not, but I would say again, I was instrumental in helping to write that use policy. We used outside counsel to introduce that policy, so we've always seen education as being paramount, and also putting the employee in that place of responsibility to say, here is the thou shalts and the thou shalt nots. So I'm confident that they will be pleased with what we've done.
Absolutely. I love that you guys have that strong culture of compliance because it's definitely coming through with everything that you're saying and how you're communicating things to your employees and including them as well. And I do know just from experience that makes such a huge difference. Well, thank you, Miss Gail. And for the rest of our listeners, that's Banking Matters.